Hello everyone and welcome back to another Dark Souls 3 weapon showcase. This time I am using the Witch's Locks, and its R1s are, shockingly, alternating whipping attacks. Its R2s are going to be horizontal sweeping attacks, and its running R1 is going to be an over-the-head sweeping attack. When two-handed, your R1s are going to be horizontal sweeps, your R2s are going to be an overhead followed by a horizontal, your running R1 is going to be an overhead, and your skill is Flame Whip, which adds an extra 100 fire damage and has massive reach. As far as this weapon's performance in PvP is concerned, I have very few complaints about it. Most of the complaints, in a way, are actually mitigated by the fact that this weapon's range is just ridiculous, and its damage isn't half bad either. So, overall, it is a very reliable and fun weapon to use. It requires a slightly different playstyle than what I'm used to using, and I really had a good time with it. As far as where you can find it in the game, it's actually in the Grand Archives, in a hidden chest behind a wall that you move by pulling a lever. The lever is in the same room as this wall, and it's actually in the very first dark room, after where you can dip your head in wax for the first time, so it's relatively easy to find, and early on in that area, in case you haven't gotten it yet, that's where it is. And I'm sorry if you heard my phone go off, I just got a few souls, don't worry about it. Other than that, though, and there it goes again. I'll mute that quickly while I talk. So, other than that, as far as the basics with the weapon are concerned, it requires 9 strength, 17 dexterity, 12 intelligence, and 12 faith in order to wield. At +5, when it's fully upgraded, it has a D scaling in dexterity, a B scaling in intelligence, and a B scaling in faith. So overall, it's got some pretty high scaling to it. Great for any sort of pyromancy build, and honestly, not half bad on any sort of intelligence or faith build. The scaling on it really is kind of fantastic, to be perfectly fair. It's got some decent base damage to it as well, so its physical base damage at +5 is 134, and its fire base is 140. That, in combination with the fact that its R2, or rather its L2, its skill, adds on 100 fire damage, you can actually get some fairly high hits. I had messed around with respecking on the build for the sake of this showcase, actually, and my attack rating with this weapon was right around 470. And that's, a build that's sort of dedicated to it, so that's, a pretty nice thing about it. So that's that. As far as anything else with the weapon, there's really nothing too terribly basic about it. So we will just move on from here into the pros. And of course, the biggest pro of this weapon is not the fact that it is unparryable, because it most certainly is unparryable. It is a whip, that much has not changed. It is the fact, though, that its range is absolutely ridiculous. You will see many times throughout this video, my rolling R1s and my L2 have stupid amounts of reach, and fairly good tracking as well. They are a set of attacks that you can easily rely on, and if you want to play very defensively, you can get some nice, easy wins by going that route. They come out very fast, they have great reach, their damage isn't half bad, and overall, that is enough to make this a very good weapon. Other pros of the weapon, aside from the damage, aside from the scaling, its moveset in general, as far as its R2s are concerned, that is a good way of mixing up the attacks, and that is a good way of actually dealing damage to someone who is rolling sideways around you or trying to strafe around you. So that's a viable strategy right there. In addition to that, another thing about its L2 is because it deals so much extra fire damage, and because you already have such high fire damage from your base and your scaling, you can easily eat through someone's shield if it's not heavily fire resistant. So that's a big benefit right there. Other than that, though, pros of the weapon are kind of few and far between. In fact, it actually, in my personal opinion, has more cons than it does pros. And it's a bit understandable and a bit reasonable when you really think about it. Its L2 is the slowest attack that the weapon has. It's got the most reach and most damage, so that's fine. That's not really an issue. But the issue is, you actually cannot do any criticals with this weapon. You cannot do a riposte, you cannot do a backstab, you cannot do a guard break riposte. It does not work, it's not a thing. I don't know why they chose to take it away, because it was a thing for a very short period of time when the game was initially released, if I'm remembering properly. But they did away with it for whatever reason. And you know, at the end of the day, that's not a huge deal because you can always swap over to your secondary weapon. However, if you're using this weapon exclusively, like I am for the sake of the showcase, it's the difference between winning and losing a fight on occasion. And at the end of the day, of course, that's not a huge deal, but it can be a minor annoyance, so something to keep in mind. Other cons of the weapon, if you don't have all of the stats for it, then it of course will not be a great investment. It is still pretty decent on a pure intelligence or a pure faith build, but it really just doesn't shine until you have both of those scalings being fully utilized. The difference for me personally before I respec this build was an attack rating of around 330 compared to one of around 460, 470. That is a huge difference. And then that plus the additional 100 fire damage you get on the L2. I mean, that's just massive. That is a very, very, very big difference. And again, something that you need to keep in mind. If you are going to be using it, yes, it can be done, but is it the most viable thing? No. Is it the best thing? Definitely not. That said, it is a very powerful weapon. It is a very fun weapon. I really enjoyed using this thing. It is a bit of a shame that it cannot be buffed or infused, but at the end of the day, it deals enough damage as it is, it's viable enough as it is, and it's got enough that it makes up for it, so I'm okay with it. Other than that though, I really don't have terribly much else to say about this thing. I enjoyed using it. I would recommend it if you have not had a chance to play around with it yet. You can really punish people extremely well if you play more on the defensive side of things, and that is always an interesting change of pace for me personally, because that's not typically what I focus on. And that's what whips really excel at doing in this game. They excel at punishing, they excel at getting that quick hit out after your opponent misses an attack. They excel at getting that L2 when your opponent rolls into you and you can see them doing it like I just did to this guy. That's 600 some odd damage. That is just fantastic. The reach that it has had on so many of the other people I've fought. You guys see where I'm coming from with this weapon. It's really a very good weapon for just sort of assaulting players and getting inside their head. They don't always think that you're, in range to hit them, and most of the time you actually are. So you can get away with some really, really nice hits, and that's always a nice little thing that it's got. One final con I actually don't think that I mentioned it. I don't know how I overlooked it, but its ability to stun someone is complete garbage. If they are in the middle of an attack, you cannot out-hyper armor them. This weapon has almost no hyper armor. It cannot stun someone who has hyper armor. You are pretty much screwed. So pay close attention to that. You need to be careful when using this weapon. You need to focus on your range more than your ability to trade. But other than that, I've got nothing else to say. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, found it helpful in one way or another. Please like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff, and I will see you guys next time.